Hi, everyone. Welcome to Everything Life and Financial Freedom. I'm Linda McKissack.
And I'm Jim McKissack.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Linda.
We see each other all the time. I would say, how are you doing? But I know how you're doing. So, hey, welcome to Everything Life and Financial Freedom. Jim and I would love to share with you kind of our story about what our financial freedom story looks like. And so, Jim, why don't you kick us off?
Well, let's talk a little bit about where you came from and where you started at. Because back in the 70s and 80s and stuff, I was in the restaurant and nightclub business. You were.
I was in my mid-20s. I always like to say I didn't even know what the word economy meant, much less is it a good one or a bad one. And I certainly didn't know how much $600,000 in debt looked like.
Yeah. Well, that was a new experience for myself too. But what really happened is one of our businesses, we had several businesses up in this little town north of Dallas called Denton, Texas. I was in the restaurant and nightclub business, and we were very successful in our operations there. And we sold all those operations and took the money that we made from that and all the money that we could borrow. And we went and opened up a place in Dallas. It was kind of similar to Dave and Buster's. It was pool tables, video games, and a pool kitchen and everything. And to make a long story short, it didn't make it. Next thing we knew, we had to sell it for $600,000 less than we owed on it. And it was about a year there that we were really fighting and struggling, trying to figure out how we were going to get the banks paid back and everything else.
Yeah. And, I always like to say usually the thing that is the worst thing that happens to you, if you give it long enough and you learn what are my lessons from this, it can be the greatest experience. And I think that has definitely been true for us. Had we not gone through that experience, Jim, I don't know that you and I would have put financial freedom high on our list. We would have thought, hey, we just keep making great money and that's the answer to everything.
Yeah. And at that time, I was almost 40 years old. And so, I could see one of my goals as a young person was to be able to retire by the time I was 35 years old. And to not have made that or to made a lot of money and squandered the money or whatever and lost the money in a business venture, that was something that really put us on the path to financial freedom.
Yeah. I always like to say it was a really, really hard time. I always say it's never marriage enriching. Jimmy and I have been married for 40 years as of January 11th. So we made it through all of it, but it was never a marriage enriching time when you're climbing out of that kind of debt and you have those kind of financial pressures on you. So number one, we're blessed we made it.
Right.
And number two, I think, again, it's asking yourself, what doesn't feel good about this experience and what do I need to do differently next time? What did I not do to get me here in the first place? And then what do I need to do differently next time? So, because, here's the thing, Jim, and you and I both have been through at least 3 gradually and suddenly.
Yeah.
Gradually and suddenly is one of those things in life that gradually things are happening and you're not really paying attention. And then suddenly it kind of slaps you up against the head or something. But if you live long enough, you're going to experience quite a few of those. And the trick is to not be surprised by them. And then number two, how do you be ready for those? And I think that's kind of what happened to you and I. That was a wake-up call for us that even though you were making a lot of money at the time, you walked around with big wads of money in your pocket from cash registers and things like that, we weren't anywhere close to financially free.
Right. And I had one of my mentors early in my career, told me, that if you really want to make a lot of money, real estate was really the way to do it.
Yeah, which you then told me when I asked you, what can I do to help you? Or you said, hey, I need your help. I said, well, I'm a hard worker, but what in the world can I do to help with this kind of debt? And I love it because your mentor had told you years ago,
right.
You told me, now you got to come understand where I was coming from. I'd never even lived in a house that we owned. No one in my family had owned a home. So I had no idea what real estate even was. And I certainly don't think the man said, hey, get a wife, get her to sell houses. You guys will be rich forever. I don't think that was the message, Jim, although you tricked me into thinking that was the message.
It was worked out as pretty good deal for you.
Yeah, it actually did. I laugh and say it was a great misunderstanding that you had. But I think what we since learned is the guy was a big developer and builder out of Dallas. And really what he was really trying to say is do something that builds wealth in the real estate area, which you and I would come to learn later. That's what he really meant.
Yeah. So that worked out pretty well for us. So.
Yeah, I think, it got me, you were still kind of trying to figure out what you were going to do if you were going to stay in the restaurant and nightclub business. I got busy selling houses, working my ever loving life off. And we had rough moments because there's a lot of fear, and under anger is fear. And I think there was a lot of that, which I think if any of you out there have experienced that, you know what I'm talking about. You're really fearful. You don't know where the bottom is. I mean, I'm okay if I know where the bottom is, but when you don't know where the bottom is, I didn't know how far we were going to fall.
Well, my problem was that 600,000 was like $10 million to me at that time. And so knowing that a nightclub manager, because I couldn't afford to buy anything, to own anything, credit was blemished and everything else. And so, it just put us on a totally different path. When I realized the most I could make as a manager in the late 80s and early 90s was about 500 or 600 a week, and you owe 600,000, the math doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you needed to find something that could put you on a path to make a lot of money.
So that kind of explains why you cried in your beer for just a little while.
Yeah, I did cry for about a year in my beer.
Yeah. But here's the beautiful thing. The beautiful thing is, again, not what happens to you, but what do you learn from what happens to you? And I wouldn't today, I don't think you or I, either one, would trade that experience for anything in the world. And I think honestly, COVID might be the same situation for a lot of people. They weren't prepared. Maybe the 08, 09 crash was something that took a lot of people out. There'll be another one down the road. And so, I'm just thankful for that now, because we have gone back and learned, which we'll talk about more in a later episode. How did we get ourselves from that starting point to,
where we're at today.
To where we're at today. And
Yeah.
so we'll go into more details in some of our future episodes. But, I think for me, Jim, after I stopped being angry and upset that I was in that situation, because at the time, quite honestly, we had a child, we had a new kid, and we had a couple other kids a little bit older, and it was very fearful for me. And, and I think the reason it was fearful is because up until that point, I'd never made more than minimum wage.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I feel like the whole world's on me. And, and I think I've certainly met a lot of women that have wound up in those positions. And here's the thing, I could either be really, really angry at it, which I did do some of that, but, or I can decide, who am I and what do I have? And how can I become someone who could have the skill and the technique and the means to get out of this kind of situation?
You didn't quite understand, and I didn't quite tell you about, I'd seen the evolution of the Texas real estate exam from the 70s. Whenever I got my real estate license, went work for a builder, hated it. 80s, went back to work for another builder and for a little small real estate company, really hated it. And then the 90s, I came back and joined you on your team, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, and I think the reason he's saying that part is because when I asked him, what do you think I should do? You said real estate. And so, like I said, because I didn't even ever live in a home that was owned, I didn't know what a realtor did. But, the beautiful thing is, I don't think it matters what anyone would do if they were in this situation, anybody who's listening. But what would matter is that you get in the flow of money. You start figuring out, okay, how do I cut expenses, which we did. We downgraded our cars dramatically. I remember was it a Pinto?
It was a Pinto with a big dent in the side that I paid $900 for cash because I couldn't go get a loan at the bank.
Yeah, that the door creaked when we opened it, and it had a dent on
so
one side.
So I went from a red Cadillac to a old Pinto with a dent in the side.
Yeah, and I think I remember at one time, what was that little sports car you had? Even that's when you tricked me into marrying you, because you look like you had all this cash. What was that little car? Z28 or
Z28?
Yeah. So yeah, you start peeling off the layers of debt, and one of the programs we always tell people that we love, and we don't agree all the way with it, but we agree if you're going to try to get out of debt, do Dave Ramsey. But we don't believe that you don't go eventually have good debt.
Well,
so
there's
that's
good
where
debt, there's good debt and there's bad debt.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that later in later episodes. But so got in the real estate business, worked as hard as we possibly could. Eventually you joined with me, and we just worked really hard to create as much cash flow as possible, with the understanding this time that cash flow is not wealth, right? I mean, we didn't know that the first time. I didn't. I thought you just made a lot of money and that solved all your problems.
Yeah, well, that's the way most people look at it. they work really hard at one job and stuff, and then their lifestyle exceeds their income from what they're doing, and they spend more than they make. And then there's no more money to put in the other side of the equation to put money to work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think then what we did is we started trying to, well, and first of all, in Texas at that time, because the economy was on savings and loans, oil and gas and real estate, there was a lot of people in bad shape.
Yeah.
There wasn't somebody we could look to and say, hey, what do we need to do? Everybody seemed to lose everything.
And everyone was filing bankruptcy at the time. That was at the time when the savings and loans went away completely. And in every downturn, there's always an opportunity, even an opportunity for us that had blemished credit, not good credit. We had absolutely no cash. The only piece of real estate we owned was a house that we lived in with a big mortgage.
Yeah, owner finance.
That was owner finance.
Yeah.
And so, there was every reason in the world for us to not get on this path. Another one of my mentors that really helped a lot, he also taught me that money has its own set of rules. And so learning the set of rules and everything for money was primary. You and I were reading like crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one of the best books that we read was a book by Robert Kiyosaki, and we'll talk a little bit about, but for us, we said what would be the most natural step that we could do. And we chose to try to do real estate investing.
Yeah. And so, what's really kind of exciting about that, let's say if you were going to invest in the stock market, it's illegal by the SEC to be an inside trader, to know information, from the company. So, well, as realtors, we already are inside traders. I mean, we're in the business of real estate. We understand the situation, and we're always fiduciary to our clients and give them the opportunity to take the best deal that's out there. But some people are willing to trade time for money.
Yeah, so true. And I think, and we'll talk about how do you choose which door to walk through when you're going to decide to create financial freedom. But I think for us, because I immediately started selling real estate to try to build cash flow.
And by the way, whenever I looked at real estate as a cash flow business, you can make as much money as real estate as you're willing to work for. And so in being $600,000 in debt, real estate was really our only choice to get out of that debt without filing bankruptcy.
Yeah, so true. And one good thing back then, the RTC was the Resolution Trust Corporation, was who was taking properties back, which would eventually lead to a good deal we got to buy in the real estate arena. However, the good news about that time, and each crash has its own set of rules. It has its own place that you can figure out how to get yourself out of it. And with this one of the good things, and I don't know why, you may know why this was, but the banks would come to us and say, hey, I'll take 30 cents, 40 cents on a dollar. And so that's why we didn't have to file bankruptcy. But do you remember why that was the case? Because I don't know if that was the case in 8 and 9.
Because the reason why they would do that is because if you file bankruptcy, they could stand to get nothing.
Oh.
So if you were willing to go in there and say they're willing to discount the loan, 50 or 60%, if you could put the cash together to go do that, at least they're getting something back.
Yeah. So that was our saving grace. That's the reason we didn't have to file bankruptcy. And I think the other thing that saved us is you and I didn't have a ton of credit card debt back then. No. We really just went from having a lot of cash to no cash pretty quickly.
One of the smart rules we learned at that time also while we were broke was if you do have any credit cards, you've got to be able to pay them off in the 30 days. We never had credit cards that we extended. And so we got in the habit of paying those off on a monthly basis. And I don't think we've ever had any credit card debt since then.
Not that we didn't pay off every month. Yeah. No, I think it's just, and we were blessed. I mean, I think that's an easy trap for a lot of people to get into. And I always say, if that is your situation and you're listening, then, pick up Dave Ramsey's books, Financial Peace and all that stuff. Cause he has a great
Total Money Makeover.
He has a great method. Because, I know we're going to hear from people and say, well, this is easy for you. But I've got all this, debt and everything, which I don't know how they could say it was easy for us because it wasn't easy for us. However, everybody, sees their situation the way it is. And so I would say if that is a case, if that is you, then that wasn't necessarily our situation, but go pick up Dave Ramsey's books and read that way. And then, I think one reason you and I are doing this podcast is we are average people. We're not somebody who we're not creating a computer company in our garage. That's not ever going to be something we do.
Well, if they saw your background and the house that you were raised in and the background and stuff, and even myself, I came from a lower, poor, middle class family.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because and the reason we say that is because I don't care where you are out there. I think it's when you decide and realize the importance of financial freedom. And for you and I, the pain, we were getting away from the pain that we'd had to never have that pain again. But for somebody who hasn't had that kind of pain or anything yet, because if you live long enough, you'll experience everything. But for someone that hasn't, what I'd like to do is kind of explain a little bit about what are some of the really good benefits, Jim, that you and I have really received from getting on this financial freedom journey. And I think more people than ever, I always say two things that people are going to come out of COVID wanting more of: more wealth and more health. Mm-hmm. And so what would be something you would share with a group that was a benefit that you didn't even think about, that when we got on this financial freedom journey, this was actually even sweeter than we realized would be later as we created that financial freedom? What are some of the benefits that you see that a person has in their life if they will commit to creating financial freedom?
Well, one thing, it needs to be a top priority for you. It needs to be as important as paying your mortgage payment every month, mm-hmm. of making sure you're committing some funds, cash flow funds, to go build wealth with. So getting into that kind of a habit was really one of the things that we did. And there's several things. And my sister, if you want to take an example, my sister was in poor health. She had COPD and very bad. Neither her or husband worked. They were living off of Social Security. Mm-hmm. They had a pretty nice house in Denton. They were trying to make payments and mm-hmm. keep up and stuff. And I mean, they were one flat tire away from bankruptcy.
Yeah, they were riding it gradually and then suddenly.
Yeah. And so anything that could happen. And then my sister got really sick and stuff, and then they got behind on their house payments, and they couldn't pay it anymore. And so my brother and Linda and I and my sister-in-law, we went together and we formed a life estate for them. We went and paid off their house for them and let them live there as long as they're alive. And then whenever they pass, it'll go to us.
Yeah. Well, and I always say that's one of the greatest feelings in the world, when you can just write that check and you don't stress over it. You don't do anything. And it feels so good to be able to step into that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. Another example is, our son-in-law at 30 years old got cancer, and we, for 10 and a half months really needed to be there.
That's in South Texas, 6 hours away from where we lived.
Yeah. So having that financial freedom, we were able to pick up and be there majority of the time with them during that process. And I always say, when something like that happens, you want to be in the middle of it. You don't want to be sitting on the outside, not knowing what's going on or being able to contribute. And without creating financial freedom, we would have been having to worry about how much money we could make to make all our bills and do all that stuff. And then I think, with both of us, we've had to contribute money to, burying our parents, because they just didn't, they didn't have the means and they didn't do whatever. And so, and then our experiences, I mean, those are all kind of gloomy sides, but, we have the ability to have a plane and go see our grandkids when we want to, and bring them here and fly where we want to, when we want to. Have a beach house because we both love the ocean. I mean, these are all perks and things. I'm a big lover of Salvation Army. We're able to give to Salvation Army in our church, and things that are important to us. If you don't have financial freedom, those get put at the bottom of your list.
And unfortunately, I see a lot of people that are so into instant gratification mm-hmm. in the society now that they don't look out to the future. What was really amazing about our story is I was 40 years old before we bought our first investment property. Mm-hmm. And, and so that was really a little bit old to be getting started. At least that's what I was told.
Yeah.
And it worked out to where we financed most of our stuff on the shorter term. And, those things, we were building wealth every month that the
Yeah.
people were paying their payments. And so,
Yeah. So yeah, that is one thing you and I hear a lot, because Jimmy and I have been teaching. First of all, we wrote a book called Hold: How to Find, Buy, and Rent Houses to Build Wealth, and just put all of our story and all of our principles in there. And we'll be sharing those with you on this podcast also. But we just really, I think we got lucky to have that experience, because it woke us up sooner than most people, even though you were almost 40. But again, and we hear this a lot when we teach, people feel like it's too late. And yet you can change any financial situation in a good 5 years of solid focus.
yeah, in 10 years, you can become mega wealthy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Awesome. Well, as we wrap this first episode, so welcome to Everything Life and Financial Freedom. Jim, as we wrap this, what would be one final bit that you'd like to still share?
I would say that to get out of the instant gratification mode,
Yeah.
we really were doing very good in our real estate practice and building a very good cash flow business. So we didn't need money today, but we needed money 10 or 15 years down the road, whenever we either chose to not want to work anymore or we couldn't work anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think most people are living in the moment and they don't want to give up any sacrifices. I love Dave Ramsey saying that you got to live like no one else so you can live like no one else. And I don't think we weren't deprived of anything. We still had a great lifestyle. We had great things that really we lived fine. We didn't live above our means, but we also didn't live way, way, way below our means where we feel like we never got to do anything.
We had a comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah. We just put more emphasis on building financial freedom in the future. And I think, I always say that my earliest memory of my soul telling me that freedom was important to me was when I was 18 years old. And I took my first job after high school that was not like my other jobs. My other jobs were going at 5, get off at 10, because I'm working around school schedule. And after I graduated from high school, a friend got me a job at GTE and I had to go in at 8 and get off at 5. And I always say I felt like a caged animal. Going in at 8, getting off at 5 just wasn't for me. And really what was happening is my soul was saying, look, freedom is going to be one of the most important things to you, and freedom of your time, your money, and your relationships. And I think of all the things that I've gotten in this journey, I love the freedom in all 3 of those areas. And you're not going to get those if you don't start working on it now. I mean, that didn't happen by accident. It happened by design.
Yeah, I know that I'm wired as an entrepreneur, and so are you. And so being that entrepreneur, we're always wanting to create and do things and stuff. And one of the things we found out is we need great people around us and stuff to help us through the journey. And, and so that's another lesson, I guess, that surround yourself with great people.
Yeah, because nobody succeeds alone, and so I would just say, if you love this conversation, be sure and hit subscribe below if you haven't already, and pass it along to a friend or someone and we'll share in further episodes. No matter where you get your money from, whether you're an employee or self-employed, there's a way to get financial freedom. We'll talk about all of those in the future episodes. But if you have not hit subscribe, please do hit subscribe below. Also pass it along to anyone that you think would love to have conversations around everything life and financial freedom. And Jim, I'll see you in the next episode.
Okay. Sounds great, Linda.
See you there.